All right, good morning, everybody, again. Welcome to the second in the four-part series on exporting. My name is Susan Gates. I'm the co-founder of the TheWMarketplace, and we have partnered with the U.S. Commercial Service in organizing and promoting this event, and we're just thrilled to have everybody here with us today. Today, we're going to be focusing on pricing for export, an area that's incredibly important, especially if you're interested in doing something like protecting your margin, which is we all want to do. And it can also involve technicalities that may not be obvious or clear to anyone who's just getting started with exporting or those looking for new markets. So we are so excited to have two experts who will lead us through many of these considerations. Zara Castillo of the Export Finance Assistance Center of Washington and Tiffany Archie of Zonos. But before we get into this pricing discussion, I'm going to take, I promise, just a couple of minutes to introduce the TheWMarketplace. Thank you, Lisa, for doing the slides. So as I mentioned, my name is Susan Gates, and I'm the co-founder of the TheWMarketplace. We founded this company in the spring of 2020 after seeing the disproportionate impact that the pandemic was having on women, combined with the increase in online shopping and the desire for shoppers to have alternatives that align with their values. Can you, next slide, please? So our answer is the TheWMarketplace. It is an online store that offers women entrepreneurs who sell both products and services a place to sell and grow their businesses. And it's a new destination for shoppers to support women business owners. Now, as of today, we have had over 500 businesses join us with over 4,000 products and services. And you can just see a little snapshot of what our homepage looks like today. And next slide, please. This is a glimpse of our community. You can see that we have intentionally recruited sellers that represent the landscape of businesses across the US. We provide the sellers the opportunity to identify with one or more community, which also allows shoppers to support those communities that they resonate with. This is an example of the women who have opted into those communities, so you can see the division of the different communities that they identify with. Next slide, please. So why are we working with the U.S. Commercial Service? We're doing this for several reasons. One, we know that exporting is one way that women's businesses can grow and thrive. Even if you're a small business, this is an option as long as you have the information that you need. It is also core to our mission to provide practical and useful information to women entrepreneurs and to reveal all of the resources to help them grow, like the Commercial Service, the Export Finance Assistance Center of Washington, and Zonos. And also, and this resonates with me particularly, there are not a lot of examples of large, successful women-owned businesses. And we want to provide some inspiration to entrepreneurs who, like us, have visions of being a big company. And expanding your vision outside of the US is one way to get there. Next slide, please. So with that vision in mind, I'd like to invite those of you who may be looking for another sales channel or are thinking about pivoting your business online to consider joining us. We would love to have you. And if that's not the right move for you right now, I'd invite you to shop and support other entrepreneurs. We have some amazing, amazing products and services. So next slide, please. So thank you for giving me a few minutes to introduce the TheWMarketplace, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. My email, you can see my email below. And now I would like to turn it over to Lisa White, who will introduce the U.S. Commercial Service. Thanks, Lisa.
All right, thank you so much for the intro, Susan. So for those who weren't on the first session with us, I'm Lisa White, and I am a commercial officer at the U.S. Commercial Service Seattle office, which provides services across the state of Washington. The U.S. Commercial Service is the International Trade Administration's export arm, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. We are delighted to be co-hosting this event with the TheWMarketplace today. As you just heard from Susan's presentation, our missions are truly aligned, and we're proud to work together, not just on this series, but also beyond, to support women who are in global business, as well as women who aspire to be in global business. So why are we here today? Research shows that companies who export grow faster, employ more staff, withstand fluctuating sales cycles more successfully, and stay in business longer. The world is full of potential customers, and we want to help you to reach them. So our mission is to grow US exports, which also increases US jobs. And our federal agency is truly global. Not only do we have over 100 offices across the United States, but we work in more than 70 countries with staff based out of US embassies and consulates all around the world. We need to support businesses, and so we need to be action-oriented to help you to make these international deals. So we accomplish this through offering a variety of services. We offer one-on-one export counseling. We can actually help you to identify the next international market that would be a great opportunity for your products and services. We also have access to powerful market research databases. And as I said before, we employ people all around the world who can help you with the newest market intelligence to help you determine which markets to pursue. We also offer business matchmaking. We can set you up with one-on-one meetings with potential buyers and distributors all over the world. And in certain circumstances, through commercial diplomacy, we can actually leverage our authority as the US government to advocate for your business interests to help you to overcome an international trade barrier. So of course, over the last 2 years, many of us have transitioned to working from home. And although we may be working remotely, I just wanted to highlight that we have fully adapted the international services that we offer to US businesses, and we have lots of great options for you to choose from. Virtual services include on-demand market research, virtual matchmaking, vetting services for potential buyers, innovative online programs, and even custom website analysis services where we can actually help you to determine if your website is attracting international customers. So this is something that we're going to go into a lot more detail on the next session on digital marketing strategy next week. So please tune in for that as well. This is our office contact information for Washington State. As you can see here, each of us represents different industry sectors. I also know that we have people from all around the US and beyond on the call with us today. So if you're not in Washington State, please use the link on this slide to connect with your local office. I'll be sending this deck out after the presentation, so everyone will have access to this contact information. So now I would like to actually turn it over to the first of our two guest experts. Zara Castillo is the director of the Export Finance Assistance Center for Washington, and she's going to be sharing some information on export finance and starting the conversation on pricing and other business considerations. So Zara, hand it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. I'm Zara Castillo. I'm director for the Export Finance Assistance Center of Washington, and it's my pleasure to be here today. So just to go through an overview of what we do, next slide, please. So our services include providing free advice to local Washington State companies on the basics on how to get paid, how to mitigate risks, or how to protect yourself from non-payment risks associated with exporting. We also provide free webinar trainings for local companies on both export financing and non-financing related programs. So most of them are actually not finance related because we've identified a number of topics that our companies would benefit from, but are not easily available or accessible for them. They can all be found on our website at EFACW.org. And actually next Wednesday, after you attend the third session of the series, which is digital marketing strategies, I will be hosting a best practices for suspicious buyers webinar. So feel free to join. The info about that webinar is on our website, and I'm actually going to add a few more today. So just watch out for that. And then on top of our export trainings, we can also do referrals. We're not experts in everything in exporting, but we have several partnerships and can do referrals and introductions depending on your need. So some of those formal partnerships are with, of course, the U.S. Department of Commerce's U.S. Commercial Service, the Washington State Department of Commerce, the Export-Import Bank of the United States, and we also have relationships with a number of state and federal agencies, as well as banks and service providers. So I'm not an expert in everything in exporting, especially if it's outside trade finance, but if I'm confident I can answer your question, I will help you. And if not, I will help you get to the right person to answer them. If you're not sure, it's okay. Ask me the question. Questions are good. Even today, ask a bunch of questions that you have in your head. Just put in the chat box or the Q&A. We're here to help to make sure that you get that support and to help you take your business to the next step. So next slide, please. So just to give you another overview of how we can help you figure out ways how to get paid. I will be your trade finance advocate or translator with the trade finance minutiae. I'm going to be honest, trade finance can sound somewhat dry, intimidating, scary, or boring, but my job is to help you understand that in your own way so you can use products and services that would be of benefit for you. Next slide, please. So I just included this because I think it's very informative and a helpful diagram showing you the different types of how you can get paid. On one end, it will be favorable for you as a seller, but on the other end, it will be favorable for your buyer. So these are things that I can help you understand because choosing your payment method requires finding the right balance between you as a seller and your buyer's risks as well as the total cost. Next slide, please. So we also provide information in different government programs available for small businesses. So for example, we talk about government guaranteed export working capital loan programs, which by the way, these are not direct loans. They are guaranteed to your bank. And I can discuss that with you offline if you want to learn more. But basically, these are used to purchase equipment if you want to expand your facility, or if you have other costs in participating in trade shows, or if you need translation for marketing materials. There are two federal agencies that provide these, and it's the Export-Import Bank of the United States and the Small Business Administration. And we can talk about the pros and cons of that later on, or offline, I mean. So I would also like to highlight export credit insurance because this is a product that not a lot of local exporters are aware of. So it's basically an insurance that reduces your risk for non-payment by foreign buyers due to commercial or political risks. So you can use it as a sales tool by offering a safe open account terms. So basically you're offering an almost risk-free open account. So if you don't get paid due to commercial or political risk, you can be covered up to 90% of your foreign receivables. With Exim Bank, as a federal agency, they don't make a profit out of this. So the cost of the premium is very economical. And the next slide, please. So this slide is for resources. There's so many resources available and all you need to do is ask. Lisa just talked about the U.S. Commercial Services, and then there's a STEP grant, which is a grant that reimburses eligible expenses, and depending on the expense, the award amount varies. Since we have such a diverse audience from different states today, the links that I provided here are links to their respective Contact Us page. And just feel free to take advantage of this. And then so next slide, please. So for today's topic, it's on pricing your export goods. When you start to consider selling internationally, you need to develop a pricing strategy. Next slide, please. So I've listed here some tips that I've come across to when I talk to my clients. So first, your domestic pricing can be very different from your international. The biggest issue is that you have extra costs that your domestic buyers don't have. So this is when the U.S. Commercial Service can also help you. So research your market first. I included this link. The U.S. Commercial Service has the country commercial guide. So once you click on that link, and then you select the country, click on selling your products and services, read through them. And then after you do your research, the U.S. Commercial Service also have other services available that Lisa mentioned that can help you research your market. And some of them have a cost, but it's a low cost service that is worth your while. So not only will the information you receive will be very useful and meaningful, but it also saves you so much time than if you have to do it on your own. And insider's tip, on top of that, the cost for those services are also covered by the STEP grant. So next, consider the price of what your competitors charge. So just FYI on this, once you determine your retail price, compare that with other competitors. If it's coming from the US, it should be similar pricing. But if it's coming from a country that has a free trade agreement with that country, they should have a lower cost. So you should consider that. And then also consider the costs associated with modifying your product or your adaptability. So for example, in last week's session, Christy talked about local certifications or foreign regulations, also labeling. So if you need to add information or translate, these are costs that you need to incorporate to your pricing. And then next, know your Incoterms. So Incoterms specifies when is the buyer or the seller responsible for paying for and managing the shipment, cargo insurance, documentation, customs clearance, and other logistical activities. Keep in mind, though, that Incoterms does not dictate your payment terms. And so like there's a lot of trainings available about Incoterms. So could be pretty dry sometimes, but definitely take advantage of that, take that class. And I think I'm offering one next month. So really just watch out for my website. I'm gonna put some information there. So next slide, please. So consider cargo insurance. And FYI again, this is different from export credit insurance that I mentioned earlier. So cargo insurance protects you from financial loss due to damage or lost cargo. So remember last week when Holly was talking about millions worth of shipment, and I think that was damage at sea. Thankfully, she had cargo insurance, so she was able to recuperate her loss. So for cargo insurance, you could either get this from your freight forwarder or your business insurance provider. Definitely try to shop and just ask for quotes and compare them. And then so also keep in mind that international customers often pay more for imported products due to tariffs, freight and logistics, and local market conditions. And Tiffany will be talking more about that on the next portion of this. But lastly, don't hesitate to ask for help from your local US commercial service or small business development centers or the WMarketplace. Don't be shy, ask questions. So next slide, please. So once you've determined the price of your product, you can now calculate your landed cost, which is the next presentation. So I guess, so next slide will be my contact information. Thank you for listening. Thank you for going through all these different trade finance lingo with me. Feel free to contact me on my email, but now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Tiffany Archie, who is in charge of global partnerships at Zonos.
Good morning, everybody. Happy to have you here. We're going to go ahead and get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty details about, once you've maybe figured out some pricing details, how we're going to get that out of the US. So we're just going to run through a few things. Entrepreneurship and women, I have some facts that were very a little disappointing, I'll put it that way. But we'll get into that. We'll also get into some more pricing information, supply chain and logistics, your product desirability and doing the target marketing along with that. And then also kind of how you want to set up your checkout process and accept payments moving forward through your checkout process. So go ahead and click on the next slide. So just when it comes to entrepreneurship and women, we've definitely made progress. So 20 years ago, back in 1980, 22 at this point, there were only about 2.5 million women who owned businesses. And the business earned what the average was, about $2,200. Obviously, we've had a lot of inflation since then, but it was still at about 31.5% of what men typically made. And so, moving fast forward up to 2019, we did pop up to 13 million. So that's amazing. So there's been a lot of progress made there. And also the generated revenue has increased significantly as well. However, it's still about half of what men are generating for their businesses. So still a little bit more legwork to be done. And then kind of what leans into this as well is that just when it comes to VC funding, any kind of venture capital funding, women are really only receiving 2% of those funds that are out there. And that really hasn't changed over 20 years, unfortunately. So, it's something to kind of consider when you are setting up your business funding and where you're going to get that from. And then another thing, kind of what we'll be getting into here, is just that internationalization. So obviously the more money a business is making, the internationalization rate rises. And so but for women, we're still only at about a 6.5% internationalization rate going global, and then men are almost double that for launching their new businesses, and keeping that in mind as part of the positioning of the products externally. And kind of going more deeply into that is that globally, the women entrepreneurs are going to be looking at much more of a localized market. There's nothing wrong with that, but men are going to be a little bit more courageous in going out to national and international markets. And so it's just something for women to kind of consider, because there's two really important things you want to think about when you're talking about exporting and going globally. First of all, 95% of everybody in the world lives outside of the US. That's so many people. And then on top of that, 2/3 of the world's purchasing power is actually outside of the US as well. So when you're talking about, hey, I've got my local markets and I'm making money here, maybe the next step is to expand to national and grow that, potential for your business. But then really taking that globally, there's so much more out there that in terms of market share that can be grabbed, and just so much more that can be done with your business, your brand, all that good stuff. So it's a big world out there, and we want to start jumping into it a little bit more. And we're we're all here to kind of help facilitate with that. So go ahead and move on to the next slide. So pricing, what you want to do, as Zara already kind of mentioned, you want to understand your product pricing. So is that brand of yours, or is your product? So you can kind of consider the uniqueness of that. Maybe your brand is just absolutely killer and people across the globe are loving it, or maybe you do have a super unique product. But you do just want to kind of consider, can that be sourced locally by that international shopper? And sorry, there's a little bit of a typo there. But just keep that in mind. And when you go out and visit people either at the Department of Commerce or, the Export Finance Center with Zara, they'll be able to kind of give you a little bit more information in terms of marketability and, maybe some good countries where you might want to focus on if you're just starting out. So, but kind of in tandem with that is you're kind of discovering, hey, maybe these are the top 10 countries that I want to start shipping to. Some people have just a global strategy. They want to ship everywhere right off the bat, but maybe other people want to have a little bit more of that concentrated focus. You really want to understand what those duty and tax rates are for those various destinations. Because, a lot of Europe, they have that 20% VAT that you already have to kind of add into, so just kind of keep in mind, is it something that if they could source locally, they're still going to have that out there as well, whether they're paying it, whether it's incoming or whether they're paying it there locally. But these are just kind of things to kind of keep in mind. And how you price, like Zara was mentioning, whether it's domestic or internationally. And then you really want to kind of understand your carrier fees too, in terms of, hey, are there peak season surcharges? And unfortunately, the peak season surcharges used to really only be during peak, more from like November into December. And what we were kind of seeing, especially with COVID and just supply chain disruptions all over the place, those are backing up. So, sometimes they're coming into August. A lot of the main carrier, if you're just doing small package exports out to across the world, it's kind of backing into October at this point. So these are things that you want to kind of take into consideration, because there might even be fluctuations in terms of, how much extra you will be paying to ship a product during certain parts of the year. And then you want to always keep in mind too, carriers, when you are shipping overseas, sometimes there's a disbursement fee. Sometimes there's an advancement fee. So if they're going to bill back those duty and taxes to you, they may charge you a fee for that. And there might also be a brokerage fee. So these are things that might be kind of new to your vocabulary, but these are all questions you'll want to be asking your carrier about, just so you understand like your full everything that's going to be that you're going to need to be keeping in mind when you're sending stuff overseas. And so, same with your shipping costs, because these are outside of your shipping costs. So do you want to pass along your negotiated rates? Have you talked to your carrier about having a specific rate? Do you just want to display that shipping rate at checkout? Do you want to display a flat fee? Do you want to display free shipping? Do you want to build those shipping costs into your product and have different fees, or a flat fee maybe at $100? If you spend $100, it's $20 shipping, that sort of thing. So these are all things to think about marketing wise too, just because that's obviously people are all into the free shipping. But obviously with international purchasers, I think they're probably going to be expecting a bit of a shipping fee, but it's really going to just determine, how you drive out that product in terms of a marketing perspective, and whether you're saying free shipping and building that pricing in or not. And then the big one is going to be, do you want to actually display a landed cost at checkout? So you can see this graphic to the right. It actually goes over the information that you should be taking into consideration, and also probably considering whether or not you want to include that as part of those shipping costs moving out and getting that out to the person. Oftentimes when people are, just passing through their shipping rates and they're not considering those carrier fees I mentioned, you can't really see it, and I apologize, I know it's small, but that disbursement fee I mentioned, or that advancement fee, the duty and tax forwarding surcharge, sometimes that's not included. And so the other thing you need to also consider is there are some countries where they'll also tax the shipping costs. So there's tax on tax on tax. But those are just things that you want to keep in mind, because what could happen is you could only be collecting a certain amount at checkout, not covering those fees, and then you would still owe $56 once you got all of your invoices back, because it didn't take into consideration, brokerage fees, carrier fees. So you really want to make sure that you're working with somebody that if you're able to build that all into your costs and you're able to manage that, plus for each country you're going to, for every duty and tax rate, for every product you're going to use, it's kind of a lot. So, but you just want to take into consideration too, that if somebody is saying they're going to do a duty and tax calculation for you, that's one thing, but it's going to be missing all of those other fees. And so in that example, this is, shipping something to the UK, you can see that that amount would have been off by $56. And if you would have sent it DDP, which is the duties and tax are delivered paid, that would be that gets billed back to you on your invoice, and you're paying for that. So that obviously has a big effect on your profitability and your margins. And so, and what you also want to do is always just kind of take into consideration your average order value for your international shoppers. It's going to be more than your standard, like domestic or local international, or your average order value. So those are just the things that you want to kind of play around with, because there may be more margins going internationally where you have more room to play around, because you're going to probably get people ordering more products from you just because the shipping costs are going to be a little bit more. But just kind of keep all of this in mind when you're thinking about your strategy, because you don't want to be caught, owing additional amounts at the end and losing, that margin on your product. And you don't want that to eat at your profitability either. So go ahead and move on to the next screen. Next slide. So other things to kind of consider, just your supply chain and logistics overall. So is it flexible? So is multi-sourcing an option? I think all we kind of hear, and all we're continuing to hear, all we've heard basically since the beginning of COVID, is that the supply chains are disrupted, everything's slowed down, stuff is stuck, and you're not able to get stuff as easily as you used to. I know over Christmas, everybody was kind of trying to order stuff early. So these are still things that we need to consider if you own a business, because is it like, is multi-sourcing an option? You always want to make sure you kind of have like a backup, right? Because if somebody you're ordering something from doesn't have it, or if they're not capable of getting, either some of the materials to like make sure that whatever they're passing on to you, if they're not able to obtain those materials, is there somebody else that you would be able to kind of like get that material from, or would you be able to source the same product if it's your end product from somebody else? So always just keep in mind your own supply chain as well, and if there's flexibility within that. And then just also too, like, do you want to go ahead and, start having higher carrying costs just to ensure that you actually have the product in stock? So just again, like I mentioned, that variability when it comes to seasons. I mean, we see February kind of gets a little tough because there's Chinese New Year, and then just moving into peak, it's harder to get stuff in as well. So moving into those later months of the year. So you just want to make sure, hey, do I want to take on additional carrying costs? What do I want to do here in order to ensure that you have product available to your people, to your customers who want to purchase? And then just understanding with logistics, they're going to have, they're following those supply chain disruptions as well. But you can negotiate pricing with your logistics company, with your carrier. A lot of people don't think about this when they're first starting out, or maybe when they are moving into international. Maybe you're an established business and you want to start moving into international. Why not try and negotiate a better rate with your carrier to start shipping internationally? So just things to think about. And then if you're working directly with your carrier, that's great if you've got somebody that you're working with, but also platforms. So if you have your store on a particular web host, or it's on a particular platform, or if you're using one of those consolidators that put all of your marketplaces into one, and you're manifesting labels from there, is it somewhere that, because you're using them, are you able to negotiate maybe some of their, or leverage their negotiated rates? So just kind of keep in mind that it's not like it's always going to be, where you can't negotiate those things. Those are absolutely negotiable. So kind of keep that in mind and look into that. A couple other things you want to think about is that dimensional weight versus actual weight. So let's say you're trying to ship a big box of ping pong balls, and then you have another shipment and it's a bowling ball. So while that bowling ball is a little bit more compact and tight, it's going to kind of have a certain weight. And then what you're going to do is you'll take the dimensions of that box and basically divide it. Each carrier has like their own dim divisor. But what I'm trying to get at is you want to kind of think about, like, if you were sending a huge box of ping pong balls, that's actually taking up a ton more space on a truck versus just like a little bowling ball. And so what the carriers decided to do, just to kind of have like a little bit of fluidity and an understanding, they are not only charging by the weight now, they're charging by the space that you're taking up to move that product. And so you might want to look at like optimizing your boxes too. Maybe you've got like a ton of like filler in there. If you need it, that's great. Obviously, you want to make sure that all of your products get to where they're going in one piece. But if your box is excessively big, you might be paying more for that just as a result of the dimensional weight. So that's always something to keep in mind as well. And then at your service level offerings, what you're going to actually show at checkout, just understand that there are time and transit variations. And so, you know, maybe if you're offering more of an economy service that might take 2 weeks, you really want to display that so your customers understand the difference between, hey, this is more of an economical service level. It'll be cheaper for you to ship this way. However, it's going to take 2 weeks to get to you. So you just want to make sure your customers understand. Maybe somebody has a birthday coming up and they went after the gift really late. Maybe they need to have that tomorrow. So you want to offer, you know, kind of a good selection of service levels for them to receive those things. And so just, you know, basic marketing principle is that if you're offering, you know, 3 options, somebody will usually, you know, typically it'll keep them happy because they'll have options to upgrade versus just waiting for it to come very slowly to them. So you want to always make sure that you're accommodating your customer and kind of like what their needs are. And then just kind of understand that with a lot of those express and economical options, so, you know, stuff going over air, it includes a standard brokerage clearance. So that's included in that. But if you were sending stuff, like maybe you were sending it up to Canada or down to Mexico via ground shipment, brokerage isn't included in that. And that goes back to that landed cost that I was kind of showing you, is that there's an entry prep fee that you would have to pay. So that's another thing that you need to keep in mind with your pricing, if that's something that you're going to offer, if you want to include that in part of the checkout price as part of the landed cost. Again, that wouldn't be included if you were just doing a duty and tax calculation. So more stuff to think about. And like I said, that best practice, having 3 or more shipping options, customers like to have choice. And so if there's a big difference between the 3 and they're just like, hey, I don't need this, obviously that's great. They can choose the slower option. If they really want it tomorrow because it's birthday, whatever, then give them that option to upgrade. And then just understanding too, stuff that's going to work into this is that brokerage and customs clearance. And so this is kind of where we're going to get into the nitty gritty of like HS codes. And what that is it's the harmonized tariff system across the entire globe. We have kind of a shared system that everybody works with. And so every single product that you have has a code associated to it. So it's just like basically saying, hey, I am bringing you this code. The first 6 digits, and typically they're anywhere from like 10 to 12 digits, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes more, just depending on the destination country. But the first 6 are going to be globally accepted and recognized. So anywhere you go, those first 6 will always apply. It's really those last 4 that are going to determine that duty and tax rate going into those other countries. And that's why it's really important to understand that there are different tax rates and there are different classifications for every single country. And, you know, Zara brought up free trade agreements. It's important to understand, hey, does my product qualify for a free trade agreement? And you should be working with your carrier to ensure that they are applying those terms to your shipping, just in case they are trying to bill for that. So if it's something that you're trying to make sure that you're taking advantage of a free trade agreement, I know for USMCA, you just put extra little verbiage in your commercial invoice and that triggers the reduction or the elimination of the duty and tax if it qualifies. And then based on how you rate that, but it's all stuff that you should be taking into consideration when you're kind of looking into filling out your commercial invoice. But this is information. There's a lot of there are a lot of vendors out there. Zonos happens to be one of them, and we help classify these goods for you. So if it's something where you're a little bit confused, because on commercial invoices, the HTS code isn't, required. However, they may classify your product as something else, and that may vary the duty and tax rate. So again, if you're trying to quote something up front and make sure that you're not going to have any overages or under, having to owe more, you just want to make sure that you're going to have that product classification determined, and then also that description of goods. And it's just really short: what it is, what it's made of, what it's used for. If you put SKU 59723, I don't think any kind of brokerage or customs clearance person is going to really understand that. So that's why, even if your description of goods isn't that great, if you've got a good HS code description, that's going to be super helpful. And then, just making sure that all that data on your commercial invoice is correct. That's always going to help you get stuff pushed through customs clearance. A lot of people have issues with customs holds or audits, that sort of thing, if they're not putting this information on that commercial invoice. And so that's just something to consider as well as you're moving into more of those international shipments. And just a couple other things with that: when they are missing, sometimes those packages are abandoned, like the customer won't receive it if they're confused, or if you are sending the package without the duty and tax calculations included and the onus is on them to pay the duty and tax. Sometimes they'll try and come back to you and negotiate and say, give us 25% off of the product or something like that. So it's really going to be one of those, another business decision, whether or not you want the end consumer to pay the duty and tax, or if you want to include that in the checkout, so you don't have to worry about that package being abandoned or being held in a warehouse, being returned, all that good stuff. You want to kind of make sure that you're taking care of all of this up front, so it's not a concern later on down the road. Go ahead and move forward to the next slide. So product desirability and target marketing. So this is really going to be, again, where the Department of Commerce and services like the Export Finance Center of Washington are going to help you guys out. So to the left, those are the top 10 countries ranked by retail e-commerce sales. So these are the countries that you almost might be, like if you're just looking generically, these are the countries that are really going to be doing a lot of the purchasing throughout the world. So if you wanted to kind of have these maybe as your top target, your top 10, your top 5, however you want to go about it, these are kind of good ones to keep in mind. And like I have that little blurb over to the right, but the top 5 e-commerce markets have been the same since 2018. So those are pretty predictable and probably good markets to try and enter. And then it's also predicted that those will still stay that way through at least 2025. So, kind of get in touch with the Department of Commerce and your other export finance centers, that sort of thing. They can help you research those foreign markets and see if your product is something that would be desirable there. And they can also help you out with those country commercial guides. So a lot of really good information that can be drawn from that. So go ahead and move forward to the next slide. And then your checkout process, you definitely want to take a look at that, because you may be taking into consideration, hey, domestically, we've got our standard city, state, zip, and it's like typical. Are you forcing your international shopper to try and put their address details into this? So it could be really challenging. Sometimes those international addresses have 3 lines, and we're not always thinking of that or accommodating of it when they're trying to get their purchases done from an international perspective. And so are you looking to localize? And I'm sure this is going to go way more into detail like next week with all the digital marketing stuff. But just in general, you always want to review your checkout process. If it's clunky, if there's multiple steps, if there are a lot of extra fields in there that you don't need, you're going to start seeing a lot more of that cart abandonment, right? And international shoppers oftentimes like to see that duty and tax amount and the landed cost, right? Because they want to understand, hey, this is the amount that I'm expected to pay when it gets here. And if you have them just include that in the checkout and it's taken care of and it just arrives to their door without them having to stop and either, pay a driver, pay something online, it's kind of a little bit more of just like the typical process we're used to, right? When Amazon just comes and drops stuff off at our door, it really makes it for a really good customer experience. So just kind of take things into mind while you've got your domestic customer in mind. Start thinking about that international shopper and think about if you've bought stuff from overseas. Was it clunky? Was it weird? Did it make sense? And so you always want to kind of consider localization, because based on wherever they're coming from, there's tools out there. again, we kind of help with that. So, are you saying, hey, we accept international orders? Is there something in your shipping facts? We have a little pop-up we offer that greets them in their language. So we're taking a look at like browser settings and trying to make sure that we have that come up in their own language, and it's all based on those browser settings. So it's trying to make the customer feel as much at home as possible. So, and that they would feel confident in buying something from you from overseas. And then payments are huge. This is something that is really, it's kind of continuing to evolve. And these are things that are really good to understand too, because, we're so used to kind of, again, our domestic experience and how that works. So you really want to make sure that you understand what your customers prefer to use. Just kind of understanding where your customers are and their preferences, it helps you to actually set up that checkout process again, to not be clunky and to be very efficient, to like help with not currency conversion, but to help with conversion. Currency conversion is another thing that you may want to think about as well, just because sometimes it's hard for them to kind of reconcile in their own bank statement if something's in USD versus their current currency. But you always want to take into consideration those wallets. Pretty much globally, those wallets are accepted. And then one big kind of trend, and this is something that a lot of people will be implementing this year, is going to be buy now, pay later if you already haven't. So Klarna, Afterpay, Affirm, PayPal, they all offer these options. So, and I'm not telling you to use these. I'm saying these are examples. You really should go out and do your research and make sure that they are what works for you. But something to kind of think about too is crypto. And I know that sounds a little crazy and it's new and it's exciting, but a lot of the bigger not vendors, but a lot of the bigger companies and a lot of the bigger, what's the word I'm looking for? Retailers are starting to take crypto. And so that's something that, maybe that's a unique selling proposition for you as well. So that's something you could look into. And then, just really understanding what those localized payments are. Say you have a country that you ship to frequently. You may want to even look and see, like, say it's something where it's like 60% of where you're shipping to. You're just really popular in a certain country. You really want to start like investigating and maybe even asking, if you send a survey, or if your customers are really engaged with you and you've got a great community and you're working through socials and they're kind of saying, hey, can you start adding this? These are the things that you want to actually like collect that feedback and just make sure that you're accommodating those customers, because that's what's going to actually help you increase like that retention of the customer, the additional spend, and then also bringing on acquiring new customers. So these are all really important things to think about just within that whole pricing and kind of like the checkout process as well. So you can go ahead and move on forward to the next slide. So here's my contact information. I would love to connect with you. So I'm on LinkedIn. There's my LinkedIn information. The presentation is going to be sent out to everybody. If you have any questions about Zonos, feel free to kind of reach out to us. Kind of our whole platform is that we want to create trust in global trade, and doing that, we want to be very transparent. And so, it's one of those things where you kind of have options in terms of how you want to handle it. And I think we do such a good job with helping people really retain their margins and, keep their profitability, because it's one of those things that, you kind of have to, like I said, there's a lot of options out there. So do your research. But if you ever have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me. And I'm happy to go ahead and kind of check in with you and answer anything you have. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Gosh, really good information. I swear, every time I hear you, I learn something new.
Oh, thanks.
So, we're gonna do some Q&As, and if you guys have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. If you prefer to type them in the chat box, do so too. So I have one question for you, Tiffany.
Yes.
Will you speak to accessibility that relates to the checkout process?
Yeah, in terms of, do you mean like accessibility just in terms of differently abled people, or just accessibility with checkout process in general? Like, I just want to clarify.
I think just in general. This was the question that was said, and I'm assuming it was in general. Like
yeah. So I think, it's super important. Like, there's so many things that you can do. If you can have that checkout done in their local language. Again, there are a lot of tools out there that kind of help with localization. They help with language translation. I mean, do you want to make sure somebody from overseas can actually search for your product in their own language? doing the city-state zip thing, I think, is hugely important. There's also fraud, stuff that you can actually employ, because, the further outside of the US you go, probably more fraud's going to pop up. So there are options that people can look into, like including that in the checkout. There, like I said, I think localized payments and just understanding that there are various payment options and how customers, like I said, if you have a lane or two that are really, really popular, research those localized payments for them and start adding them, or seeing what you can do to kind of like broaden that spectrum so you can accommodate, how they want to pay. But a lot of people are doing surveys, maybe it's something that you include a survey, like when someone pops up on the website.
Right.
And then obviously, I think the welcome mats are just huge, because if a customer doesn't understand that you ship internationally, they may be turned off and just bounce immediately. So, and then, having the clunky checkout process, I think it makes it even worse. So you really want to accommodate to those international customers. Again, they're going to be buying more, they're probably going to be more profitable customers, and they may actually help you in terms of margin improvements. So that's just something to really think about.
So the person that asked the question actually had follow-up. If you could talk about both accessibilities, if possible.
Oh yeah, so I know there's other apps too, and I apologize because I'm looking at one to partner with specifically.
No problem.
Yeah, but there are, and those are, it's kind of one of those things where, maybe it's, you've got the talk, does it speak in their language to them? If somebody is blind and they're trying to make a purchase, having something in that localized language to be able to walk them through, hey, these are the checkout fields. Having somebody, maybe it's the bigger, I'm blind, so maybe it's the bigger, having the ability to, increase the size. There's a bunch of different stuff. There are a lot of apps and a lot of companies out there that do that. So they specify in that. It's just whether or not along with that comes like also the localization and also like the improvements in terms of the global checkout process in general.
So I have another question. Tiffany, why do you think it's so hard for women to be in international trade?
Okay, so let me just start with the fact that, again, we only get 2% of VC funding out there. So a lot of us are doing this on our own, right? Like it's all funding that we've either gotten from family members, we've gotten maybe smaller amounts of funding. And so when you're wearing a million hats, right? Like, if you're a smaller company, you are HR, you are payroll, you are marketing, you are sales, you are everything. And so I think that accessibility to funds is a challenge, and it's something that really needs to be looked at, because you know what the truth is that women actually are more successful than men in their entrepreneurship. They actually produce really more better results. They're hiring more people. And so it's just kind of one of those things where I think that's part of the problem. But I think it's also too, just like, we all kind of need to support each other, but also be able to like share this information. And so, and we have to not be afraid to ask for help. We talked about this like ahead of time too. I'm a perfectionist and it's hard for me to ask for help. So you really just do need to get out there and just look at what's available to you and, take advantage, and then just really be willing to take that step. Even if it's just you add one country, maybe you just add Canada, right? And you build from there. It's just being willing to have that kind of like, gusto to be like, hey, I want to expand this and I want to like do more. So I think sometimes it's a lot of us it might be a mental thing. Obviously it's a financial thing though too, but it's, that's what all these resources, that's what we're all here for, is to be able to support everybody to kind of be able to take that plunge. So.
And Tiffany, you mentioned just ask for help. Sometimes if you ask for help and you get information that is not directly answering what your questions are, but you never know who you get to meet. You never know what other information you get. Yes. And there's just so much resources available that we're just not aware of. And
yeah, and we need to partner more. We need to be pushing this stuff out more. Even before I really dug a little bit deeper into it, I had no idea how many government resources there were out there to like help you export. It's very confusing. So, but it's like, this is the stuff where, we're able to kind of, and then the same with Susan, she's got her marketplace, like it's communities, and it's like going to those communities and asking for help and like getting as much info. Because if you just try and Google something, I get it. It can be very heady. It can be very, very boring. And, if you can kind of like reach out to others, it's networking, how it really kind of trying to just like ask. And even maybe if you see a competitor or somebody else in your field that is doing really well, maybe reaching out to them and asking them for some mentorship.
Yeah, just have coffee or a Zoom coffee.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And also, on top of that, my experience with asking for help, gosh, so I didn't know about Zonos until recently, or like a month ago or 2 months ago, right? Because I'm just so focused on like expert trade finance and what I'm doing every day. So
Yeah.
I asked for help. I asked Ellie from the Small Business Development Center, and I said, Ellie, can you help me with this? Can you help me introduce like to Zonos and all that stuff? And it's just, you never know what you're going to get. You never know who you're going to meet and
Yep.
information you get, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I have another question. Could I use Zonos checkout without localizing my website? Could you talk about a few of like localization, globalization?
Yeah. I mean, and we have variations. So
Right.
we have something where it could just do that landed cost calculation for you. So it would still all be in USD.
Mhm.
We do have more of that white glove service to where it would come in complete with currency conversion, all that good stuff. But we're really modular. We don't say you have to do X, Y, and Z. We have our list of products and you can kind of say, I want that, I want that. And then as you scale, you could obviously, maybe you are just like, hey, I want to be a little bit more white glove. Like you can do it. Like there's options. So it's not like we're going to like say you have to start here if you're here. That makes no sense. So you know, it's baby steps sometimes for some people. Maybe you just want to get your stuff classified first.
Right.
We can help out with that and then moving from there. But we're definitely like here in terms of like, again, wanting to create trust in global trade with that transparency 100%. So
And you highlighted transparency. Transparency is key. Transparency is
yeah,
key
sometimes if you're
for
working with
retention,
partners,
right?
you
Yeah.
have no idea what they're charging you
Right.
and it might be a big impact on your margin. And so if it's something that you can handle on your own and maybe have a couple different partners versus like just saying, I don't want to deal with this, I'll just outsource everything. You know, it just is really going to depend on, you know, whether or not you're keeping that profitability and you're keeping your margin. So there's various ways of looking at it.
There's
And
options.
yeah,
As
totally.
well as everything in
Totally.
the world, right? Okay, so I
Yes.
have another question here. There's a few questions in this one general question, right?
Got
Any
it.
suggestions about how to account for long-term fluctuations in shipping charges, or any recommendations for basic shipping calculators that go across all shipping providers? I've just started a relationship with a UK distributor,
Oh,
sent off our first parcel, and pretty sure I've not calculated our margins as effectively as I could for our first shipment. And now I'm worried that if shipping costs rise, I'm going to be in trouble.
yeah, and you know, not that I'm one to like discourage that by any means, but that's also where you need to kind of look at maybe direct to consumer too, because you know, while we are looking for worldwide distribution, sometimes it's easy just to kind of like do those one-offs because you're going to be including all of those shipping costs like in that actual singular transaction versus like the freight to get it over there if you're sending it freight forwarding, whatever you're doing. But yeah, it's hard because the fluctuations, I would say those peak season surcharges, they're like all year now. They do fluctuate the closer you get and they increase the closer you get into peak season. So that's something to kind of think about. But, you know, even if you just put something on your website, sometimes people are a little bit more understanding and forgiving of the fact that it's like, hey, it's not really us. It's like, you know, due to shipping carrier. I mean, you could kind of just point it out. The other thing you could always do is maybe even include a buffer. So if it was something where you're just like, hey, we're going to maybe include a 10% buffer on the shipping costs, just because we're just, you know, those are things to think about. And I know, again, you've got to think about, hey, is this going to be competitive? But at the same time, you don't want to be left holding that, you know, overage that you weren't expecting either. So, and understanding those classifications directly correlates to understanding the correct duty and tax. And so just making sure that you get all that information is going to be huge in order to be, and we have kind of a quoter tool too. So another one of our little offerings, and we do, if you had negotiated rates with the carrier, you can turn that on, or if you wanted to estimate that, you can do that as well. So those are things that, you know, there's definitely stuff out there for you to take advantage of, and whether it's B2B or B2C. So we support both of those, and so do other vendors, not trying to exclude anybody, but we definitely have that stuff.
Okay, so I have another question here. And it's about Brazil, which actually interesting Brazil. So
Yeah.
Brazil has compounded taxes.
Yeah.
Really important stuff. So, okay, so this question says, my business is focused in developing market in other countries, and now I'm looking for companies in Brazil that could be of interest in cheddar cheese sauce. And I'm scrolling down this question. Do you think I can get help in in finding companies that could be of interest and know about the cheddar cream sauce, who should I contact, please?
I think that would fall with
Right.
you. I
Right.
mean, right?
Gosh, sorry. I'm like just reading this.
Yes.
So
One thing to keep in mind though, anything you ingest is always going to be a little bit more problematic because every single country also has health regulations. And so some of them are looser if it's direct to consumer. If you're looking to distribute, it might be a little bit more. And then like labeling requirements.
right.
So just keep that stuff in mind. But I mean, otherwise, Zara can probably go through all of that with you and just kind of, yeah.
And also I mentioned about Brazil. I just kind of got excited, but not excited because Brazil has always been an example when people talk about landing costs because they do have compounding taxes. That's what like Tiffany had mentioned earlier. Really figure out your taxes, know your market. And so in regard to this question, yes, there should be, there are resources available for this. So this is because it's like cheese sauce. So for ag companies and gosh, if you can send me an email, because I'm not sure if you're from Washington State or from your outside of Washington State. So I can give you some resources that can help you on this. And then so just looking for questions. We are at 10:57. Does anyone have any questions? Send them over. I'm trying to look at both screens here. But Tiffany, any advice for our attendees today? So many of our clients wear multiple hats, right? Or just starting out and might feel overwhelmed. So any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat what I said. 2/3 of the world's purchasing power is outside of the US. That is such a huge opportunity. And it's just one of those things that, you know, if you really are looking to grow and scale, that's where you should be going. And there are plenty of people out there that can help. You've got resources with the government agencies. You've got resources like, you know, the vendors that are actually out there helping enable global trade. And so it's just one of those things. It may take you a little bit just to kind of get a grasp on it. But the thing is that once you get this stuff running, it's pretty efficient and pretty smooth. And it's not really anything that like, I mean, it really starts to get to be just as similar and just as familiar to you as your domestic product process. So take the chance, do it.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. So I would like to hand this back to Susan.
Thank you so much, Zara. And thank you, Tiffany. I love how this closed out. I love how Tiffany, you know, although presenting this really complex information, it's like, especially if you're just getting started, all of the terminology and all of the rules and all the regulations feel very overwhelming and very, very daunting, especially for small businesses who, as we have mentioned over and over again, you know, everyone is wearing multiple hats. But my takeaway from this is that there are resources available. There are people to ask. There are resources out there. It's a step-by-step process. Like everything else, you're going to start with step one and start figuring out all of the pieces in order to be successful. So, and I love how Tiffany just said, just go for it. I think that we can get trapped a little bit in that cycle of I have to know everything before I start. And as somebody who started a business less than 2 years ago, I can tell you that it is definitely not necessary to know everything before you start. And I think in some ways it's better if you don't. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. This has been such an incredible session. The content was so excellent. And again, the key takeaway is that there are resources available to help you. So next week's session is going to be focused on a digital marketing strategy and all of those considerations for international sales. It's going to be really focused on your digital presence and the things that you need to be paying attention to if you're thinking about selling internationally. Please sign up if you haven't already. If you've already signed up, we will see you next week. And again, this recording is going to be along with all of the handouts will be sent out to all of the attendees who signed up. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you next week. Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.